Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a coastal scene in North Cornwall. And I'm starting by just putting in a skyline. It just doesn't matter if the paint skips a bit. And I've got a rock that's just going over the horizon. So now I'm going back with water and moving that paint up to give a summer sky. I'm doing this with a size 8 brush, but any big brush that you've got will work. Now I'm coming down from the top with cerulean blue. I will put a list of all the materials used in the description, together with hints and tips and more details of the location. Then with a clean brush with just water on it, take the paint for a walk to form a band of clouds. Now I'm going to take the brush and take the blue paint down again, just to give a more natural line. And dabbing it on the tissue so it's not too wet. And then a few sideways lines again. When that's dry, that should give a nice cloudy skyline. Now while I'm waiting for that to dry, I can do the cottage, which is in a very good position. And I'm going to use Paynes grey and a little bit of French ultramarine that I used in the first lot of sky. And just drop it in around the chimney. I'm not going to reveal every tile, but I'm just going to let the brush skip to give the suggestion of tiles on the roof. It's a bit lost in the grass, but I'll make a firm edge. And then on the far side of it there's a dark line, which would be useful for showing the white surf against. And there's a dark line around the chimney and something on top to keep the seagulls off probably. There is a ridge tile. So I'm just going to put a solid line in there. Just separate some of them to give a more dappled effect. And I can see a hint of a window through the shrubs. Moving over to the headland, and there's an area that's very mustard coloured, sort of summer dried grass. So I'm mixing up raw sienna and a little bit of sap green just together, dabbing off the brush so it's not too wet, and then just following the contour of the headland, just putting some paint in. And the grass licks down to the jagged rocks, and it's a bit stronger in certain places, so I'm just going to put some more raw sienna in. It almost disappears to a single line, so going back, just make it a bit stronger because it's a good contrast between the white waves and the sky. And I'm just going to drop a little bit of sap green in, which seems to be at the edge of paths and things on there. I've got a few people on the beach, so I can put a little bit of sand in. Just putting it in very lightly for now to reserve the space. And the rest of the sand is very wet. Because it's so wet, as the tide's just going out, it's not sand coloured, the water is reflecting, so it's slightly purpley. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of the colour I use for the sky and just water it down. Just drop it in sideways marks, make it a little bit bluer in places. Go round the people for now. I put them in to show scale, and then I'm into the wave line then, so I've got to stop for now. But I can go back to the house and give a suggestion of some bushes. So I'm just going to make a few marks with the brush. This is a size 5 brush that's on the go. Changing the colour a little bit, going round the house, then making a completely different colour to go further up, just to add interest. And I'm going to stop it short because I need to put the C in a clean line, so I can come back to it. So as I'm stopping it short, I'm getting a smaller brush, a tiny bit of paint on it, and just taking the paint that's there for a walk, so I haven't got a firm edge, and that'll help me get the sea to meet the bush. So now your view is being taken in, across and back. The sea is two different colours. It's much darker beyond this breaking water and at the front of the bay, and then it becomes more turquoise. The sky's now dry, and the idea of the picture is it leads you in with the white surf, so I need to make the edges darker. So I'm now going to put in Trevose Head, which is a lovely walk and an area of outstanding natural beauty, so it's really good. Several car parks are available, but I walked from a friend's house. At the very point there's a radio area, which I'm probably not going to put in, but I'm just changing the colour of the crops, which is important for the picture, and they're all quite sunbaked on the skyline. So I'll just put in a line for now and then go back with a little bit of darker colour. I'm just going to use a little bit of brown mixed with Paynes grey, just to give an indication on the hillside that there's something there, and I can come back to that. Now the fields in the middle are very baked, so I'm going to use Naples yellow, and they get more vibrant further out, so I'm just going to make it a bit stronger towards the left. And the crops change, or it might be just sun-dried grass, but it's quite browny further round, so I'm just going to mix raw sienna and burnt sienna together, and then add a tiny bit of sap green just to knock the brightness back a bit, because it is some distance away, and if you're using colours a long way from where you are, you need to just adjust them slightly. So what you can do is drop different colours in different areas and let them merge. And then going further along the cliff face, I don't think there's anything much that's growing there, it's just rock, so I'm mixing a dark rock because it's further away. I'm using indigo and burnt sienna. I'm trying to use the same colours to give it continuity. There's a little dip. I'm just going to get a wet brush and just pull that line down a little bit, and then the grass that is showing on the front here is quite a dull green because it's further away and it's a very exposed position. I'm just putting some on, and it goes down in a little dip here, and then the rest is rock. So I'm just putting a loose edge on and just add a little bit of dark around the edge of the fields, and it comes down in fingers to the cliff edge. I don't want to make it solid, I just want to add some, and then I'll go back in with a homemade grey or a different colour just to break it up. So I'm leaving gaps deliberately, just working the line up and down because it's a narrow piece of rock there and you can't really tell. But I need to leave room for a bit of sea. So I'll go in with some grey and just cut through that line, and then cut through it with some yellow ochre, which will break it up slightly. Now moving forward, the rocks are much greyer, further away, more weathered. So I'm using Paynes grey and indigo together, but I need it to be a little bit more vibrant to separate it from the grass. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of burnt sienna to it, just to warm it up a bit, to show the difference. And then again, there's big chunks, so just putting a little bit in, lifting some of that paint off with the brush and moving it just to break up the rock. And in the middle there's a few gullies and things, so I need to put the gullies in, and then there's a different coloured area sticking out, so I'm putting a dark line around that to show the difference. And I'm going back with water at the moment just to soften those lines, and then just going back in, not everywhere but just every now and again, wipe the brush off and then just move the paint that I've put on. And again here, just wipe it across just to feel the white paper and move forward to the rocks here, which are the most amazing shapes. They're sort of eroded left to right and top to bottom, so you've got chunks sticking up. So to start with, I'm just going to put a layer of homemade grey in the shape of the rocks, letting it down a bit, taking some paint from one place to another, going in again, putting a slight curve on the stroke, changing the colour slightly, just putting in the cliff edge, and the rocks come quite a long way down onto the beach, so just bringing the paint down a little. Now I'm going to mix up a really dark brown of burnt sienna and indigo, get a smaller brush and just put in some contours, just with a little wiggle, and let it bleed into the wet area. Let the water do the work. I'm not recharged the brush, I'm just using what's on the brush just to do the job, finding anything I can just to mark it out. Now I'm just going to make some bigger marks and leave that to dry for a moment. I'm just returning to the back of the picture, and I've got a little triangular rock I can put in. I'm now using a size 1 brush. Just drop it in, and it's got white water around it, so I'm leaving a jagged edge, and it's got a little bit of a hooked top, so I'm just making that. And I'm going to just dab it with a corner of kitchen roll, just to dab it off a little bit to give it more contours, and then I can highlight it when it's dry. And then along this rock here, all the water comes in and it's eroding the rock as it comes. It's been doing it for a very long time. So all the rocks, the recesses in them are all facing one direction from the power of the water, so I'm doing diagonal stripes just to show how the cliff's gone. I'm going to go back in with the homemade grey and go in between them just with little dabs, and the grey will, as it's got yellow in, will send some of the paint back and give a more random edge. And it is quite wiggly because there are waves breaking at the time, and then coming forward it's still very dark and there's some shadows, so I need to go up into the hillside. There's 2 separate areas of rock with a big bite out of it, and that rock continues forward, and then it's not in so much shadow, so it's slightly lighter, so I'm doing downward strokes, picking up the paint as I go, and then the height of the cliff changes quite a lot. It's quite high, then it suddenly drops. So I can now come forward to the rocks at the front here, which in relation to those are much warmer colour because they're nearer. So I'm just adding more burnt sienna, and I'm doing the ones that come slightly further out to sea for a minute because I need to put the sea in very soon and I need them dry. So just making some dark lines, go all the way up to the grass, bringing them forward, the rough edge, and some of them are different colours, so I'm just going to drop in some yellow ochre just to separate it, do a chemical separation. It's like opposite magnets, they push the pigments away. And the chain of rocks goes right out into the water, and I'm going to put the water in quite soon, so I'm going to put the rocks in because I want to leave white water around them, and there's some in the surf line on the edge as well. Doesn't matter if you don't put everything in, but you just need to suggest where you are. And while that's drying, I'm going to return to the hillside, which I want to warm up a little bit. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of orangey yellow to the crop, just to make it sing out a little bit. I've just used a little bit of Indian yellow. I'm now using cadmium orange. I'm just going to water that down and take it for a walk over the page, just to make it look like a summer crop. Now the next thing to do is to suggest this field so that I get the tones right. Grasses that have self-seeded and weeds and all sorts of things, and the seed heads are quite interesting colours, so I'm going to go in with a bigger brush and some raw sienna and just do up and down strokes. And then I'll drop some green and other colours in shortly. I'm just putting in the shape of the grass. Being a cliff top position, that's all bent one way with the power of the wind, and it's slightly lighter in the middle, and then where it's got some protection from the hedge, it's quite dark. So I'm just going to put it in and then move it forwards. Now using a smaller brush, and I'm going to move the paint that I've put down just in lines. Just keep the brush going all the time and just move any paint that's there. Now I'm going to drop in some Indian red. You could use orange if you haven't got Indian red. Mix it with Cerulean crimson. And just put in some of the seed heads that are behind the hedge. It's a subtle little colour, but it will make the difference. And again, take the brush for a walk. Then I'm going to drop the Indian red in at random across the field. Wiping the brush off and again taking it for a walk. And then we've got some green in there. So I'm going to use sap green and again just drop it in into the wet paint, clean the brush off, dry it a bit, and then move that paint with the same method. And I can now go in and just put in a few cross strokes to show where there's areas of different growth and different density. Before I highlight the hillside anymore, I'm going to put the sea in, and then I can get all the colours to balance. And I'm going to use French ultramarine and Viridian for the sea, just to make a nice turquoise. Let's mix them together so that it's a warm blue. And I'm going to use a size 5 brush, but it's got a good point, so I'm just going to go gently up to the horizon. Go across the nearest I can. And the rocks have got white water around them, so I'm just going to go gently to the rock. I'm going back the other way and drop a bit more paint in to make it a little bit deeper, because I'm using rag paper and the paint soaks in quite a lot, and I want the sea to look dark to show up the white water. And the white water goes either side of that rock, so I'm just going to go round it, leave a suggestion of white water. And then come down here towards the white chimney. And the water goes all the way to the first lot of rocks, and then there's a huge splash area. So just mixing up a little bit more paint as I'm coming further towards the land. It's changing colour slightly, so if I mix up a different batch, it should be a different colour. Just add slightly more Viridian and then come over to the rocks, and again they've got lots of white water at the front of them, so I'm just going to leave some area there to show. And then hug the top of these rocks, because the angle I'm positioned, the water is only white really at the lower rocks, and then it changes colour again as it comes into a little bit of shelter, but there's still a lot of white water around the rocks, so just going round them and taking it to a point about here. going in from both angles to take it to a point. Get rid of the other white because it's a distraction, and then come down the side of the house and then I'm going to add a little bit more turquoise. I'm just going to fill in around this area here, but the waves are lapping the rocks, so I need to leave some white showing, and the best way to do that is to make a up and down line, and it looks like the waves are bouncing there. So now changing the colour again, using some cobalt turquoise this time, just mixing it in, and there's lots of bounce water off these rocks, so I'm not going all the way to the right hand side, I'm just sort of feathering the edge, and the water is coming in with waves in lines, so it's feathering that edge as well, make it look more random. Change of colour, because it's one wave following another, there's a colour change where some of it's catching the sunlight more than others, and then another change, a little bit more Viridian in the mix. I'm coming in forward in even more lines, so that's why I haven't put the hillside on yet, because I need the colours to be visible. I don't want them lost in the bright water, so I've got to look at the tones carefully. And then it goes to a slightly darker colour as rocks are showing more underneath. Coming from this side this time. And then before it dries, I'll just go back to the far side and put in some more water. And that's quite dark because it's in shadow of the cliff, so just adding a tiny bit more green and a bit more blue, just get it slightly darker. It also looks darker because it's a smaller channel, so I'm doing a wiggly edge again as though it's bouncing up the cliffs, and then just feather it out so it's lost. So I'm going to add some Naples yellow, just because it's catching sand and things nearer the water here. Just make random marks, not too much. And then the surf is more forward on the right than the left, so I need to bring the next line forward a little bit more. And then coming forward, the water landing on the beach is quite purpley. So I've got some of the sky colour from earlier. I'm just going to add a little bit of Brazilian crimson and cobalt violet, just to make it a gentle warm colour. And then there's lacy waves, so what I'm doing is doing the paint going backwards and forwards as the waves come in. And then take a small brush, wet it, put some more paint on, and just take the paintbrush for a walk. And you've got the sort of rebound of the wave and all the foam that is generated with its energy. And then going further back, it suddenly looks grey. It's a change of colour, so I'm going to use the homemade grey. Do the same again with the next wave. Only this time it's got a little bit of an angle on it, so I'm just doing curved strokes and a little bit of blue, and get the brush just with water on this time. Take the paint for a walk. So now I can make the foreshore a little bit darker, and it's more yellowy on this side, and then when it gets into the people and the shadow of the cliffs, it's slightly darker. So I'll get those two to meet in the middle. And then when it gets up onto the beach, it's quite blue. So I'm just going to use a little bit of French ultramarine. It's very, very weak. Hardly any on it at all. It's more of a puddle of water. And the only way to make these fields look very light is to make the ones around them darker. So I'm going to mix a little bit of Indian red and burnt sienna with some blue, and then add raw sienna. And I've got sort of a dark mustardy colour now. And I'm going to put that on coming forward. This field is easy because it's got a sharp corner. I'm just going to drop some Indian yellow in. If you haven't got that, use a bit of orange because it will separate the colours slightly. And I continue with the dark surround with the green on top that's darker on the right than it is on the left. Some chrome yellow to it. I'm just pulling the same paint forward with the chrome yellow so that I've got a natural change. And then I can make this a bit brighter now. But just putting the Indian yellow on the first bit just gives a good bounce to it. So I can now move to the rocks, which I've mixed up the colour for. And there's lots of crevices, so I've just got to decide where to start and stop. And there's a very dark one at the front, which is quite useful. So I'm just putting the paint in the rough shape, taking it back to the grass, and then adding a little bit stronger indigo mix just to add a few nooks and crannies. Not too many because the sea is bouncing in, but if you can put the darkest dark next to the lightest light, you get a really good contrast that gives life to a picture. They've got like little ridges. So I'll leave that to dry for a minute and go to the front. Keep working on different bits at the same time, and that's got some very dark areas, so slightly more biased towards the indigo in it. If you haven't got indigo, the darkest colour you've got will do. Don't have to rush out and buy anything. And then here there's an area that's sort of got a chunk missing. So I'll put the end of it in, and there's another one that comes down and round. So you just got to keep looking at where the chunks come and go, and then change your colours accordingly. Now that the sea's dry, I'm just going round doing little highlights like the shadow on the chimney. And just looking for anything of interest. I've got to put the hedge in here, and it needs to be quite warm but quite dark to contrast with the sea. So it's actually very dark at the bottom and it gets lighter towards the top. So I'm mixing some indigo with some sap green and a little bit of chrome yellow, and just going down into the grass just with little dabs of the brush. It hasn't got a solid edge. I'm just make a few little random marks to make it more bush shaped, and it takes your eye to the white surf. Now I've got to change colours now and add more raw sienna to it. Just take the colours into each other, go down into the existing colour, just pull it up. I'm going to take a smaller brush now and a brighter yellow. Use some chrome yellow or any brighter yellow that you've got. I'm just going to add that to the dark mix just to lighten it a little. And then with a smaller brush, just do a few ends of branches. Get it going across the white surf because it'll give good visual impact. Tiny little dots just to loosen the ends. And then we can leave a bit for where it's been bashed by the wind. And add it all a bit. Just give variety to the shape. A bit more yellow. Just come back up this way towards the cottage. It overlaps the end of the cottage. Definitely looks like a windbreak. All these things take a bit of brush work to get right. You don't do one stroke and you've got a hedge unless it's a long way away. Now I want to add some more grass around it, so I'm just going to use a rigger and put it in the raw sienna and then just take a few strokes into it. A bit more water just to join them together a bit so it's not quite such a violent join. Taking the brush up and down to pick up the green and pick up the field colour at the same time. Now go back with some green, go the other way, just to visually merge it. That can dry. I've put a hint of a drive to the cottage in, so what I want to do now is just add a little bit more foliage on the far side of the drive. So I'm just going to go back in with the same little brush, weaker paint this time, move the paint around, just slightly obscure the drive, but we still know it's there, just to sort of mask the driveway, but you can still see it. I'm going to get a big brush now and just stir up all the colours I've just used and just put them in. Just to give a mottled effect on the field and soften some of the strokes I've just put down. And then in a moment I'll take a dry brush and just go through that in a different direction. Just in all directions, just softening it a little. So the next thing I've got to do is the people on the beach. And I've got some people in the water. So I'm using a number 1 brush. And I'm just going to put them in navy blue because it's a colour I haven't used. So I'm just mixing some indigo and Prussian blue, and I'll start with their heads and put a dot in, and the same with the surfers, just put a dot in, and then come down to just a box for their body, just a rectangle, stop at the waist, put the legs in, go back and put an arm or something. You don't need to show them both. I've just put a few highlights on. I hope that you've enjoyed watching this video and that you'll get to North Cornwall yourself quite soon. This is Constantine Bay and Trevose Head. Thank you very much for watching.